Okay, good morning everybody. This is Betsy Hill with the BrainWare Company, and I am joined by Karen Bucola, our Director of Customer Service. If you call our toll-free number, you're most likely to get Karen, so many of you may already have spoken with her. But we're delighted to be with you this morning. Just a few housekeeping things as we get started. Everyone is in listen-only mode today, but we very much do want to hear your questions. You can type them into the chat window as we go along, and we will try to answer them either as we go along or at the end. We are recording today's webinar, so you will get a link to it afterwards, and you can also share it, of course, with your friends and family and whoever else you would like to share it with. We have a new feature, fairly new feature of our platform today that permits us to offer you handouts and for you to be able to download them directly from the platform while you're watching the webinar. So if you go to the little handouts tab, which should be next to the chat tab, you can see what you'll see there are a couple of documents. One is a copy of the slides that we're using today, and the other is the BrainWare SAFARI progress chart, and we'll be referring to that later. So feel free to download those now and anytime you like. And again, Karen and I are going to be monitoring the chat window. If questions do occur to you later, of course, we'd love to hear from you. You can call us or email us, and I'm going to provide our contact information at the end. So here is our plan for today. We're going to discuss cognitive skills a little bit and how they relate to academics and life. We're going to give some examples and how they work, which should help set the stage for the recommendations we're going to make regarding using BrainWare SAFARI. We're going to talk about the 3 Ps for success: planning, presenting, and purposeful coaching. Some of the suggestions we make in the 3 Ps will be further illustrated when we do a quick demo of the program. We're going to walk you around some parts of it. You're here, obviously, because you are taking the role of being your child's coach in BrainWare, and we applaud that. And we're committed to doing everything we can to make your child's experience and your experience a successful one. So again, please type your questions into the chat window. Just want to do one quick poll and get a little bit of information from you as we get started. We'd love to have you share us a little information about the ages of your students or your children, depending on who you are. So far, it looks like most of you have children under 12, although we do have a teacher or a clinician, and we have somebody with an older child as well. Okay, we've got a little of everything there, so great. I think just about everybody has had an opportunity to respond. So I appreciate that information. It helps us frame what we're going to be talking about, make sure we cover everybody's interest. So thank you so much, and we will just go ahead and be on our way. So at their most basic, cognitive skills are the mental processes our brains perform to interact with the world. And this is a chart that we use to explain them in a little more detail. Up at the top are academic achievement, workplace performance, our long-term health outcomes, all the things that we, of course, want for our children. I have 3 of my own, and it was important to me to raise them to achieve as much as they could and wanted to academically, that they would be able to have a job that would support them and their families and be rewarding, and that they would have a healthy, safe, and fulfilling life. Underneath those are the academic skills that are generally assumed to contribute to achieving the goals at the top. Most of your children, based on the ages you've shared with me, are in various stages of learning to read and do math and manage technology, and our education system assumes, for the most part, that these are the basic skills needed for college and career readiness. That view, however, overlooks a good bit of reality, and what we're going to do now is drop down to the very bottom of the chart. Again, you're going to have these to be able to download, so all of these small types, all small font words, you'll be able to look at all of them, but there are a whole bunch of foundational cognitive skills down in that bottom box. Things like our attention skills, our visual processing, our sequential processing, simultaneous processing. These are the basic ways that information gets into our brains from the outside world. Most of them happen at a non-conscious level in fractions of a second. So we don't consciously control them. And that's really not a surprise to most parents and teachers who know that it's not very effective to say, pay attention to a child if their attention skills are not strong. On top of our foundational cognitive skills are a group of skills that are now being referred to as executive functions. That's that middle box here. Not a very bright color, but we'll do that. And there are three core executive functions. These are the directive capacities of our mind. And here we have working memory, our ability to hold information in our minds while we manipulate that information. Inhibitory control, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's what lets you stop yourself from punching someone in the nose if you get mad at them. And then cognitive flexibility. And cognitive flexibility is our ability to shift our mindset when the rules of the world around us change or when we learn something that's fundamentally different. So, for example, if we learn today that the world is not flat, it's round, that requires us to rethink a whole bunch of things. And that's really a great example of cognitive flexibility. And then on top of those are some cognitive skills that we refer to as higher order executive functions. These are things like reasoning and problem solving and planning, and pretty much what you might see in a group of 21st century skills, and clearly things that are really essential for college and career readiness, not just reading and math. And what we're showing here is that all of these cognitive skills actually sit underneath reading and math and everything else that we do in school, which isn't, sometimes people think it must be, something that's nice to have, but not necessary for reading and for math. And they are, in fact, essential. And what we're going to do is explore some of these skills in a little bit more depth, just to make sure that everybody is up to speed and is looking at the same, understanding some of these terms in the same way. So the first skill I want to focus on, and that was pun intended, is selective attention. There are actually different facets of attention. We can talk about sustained attention. We can talk about divided attention when we go back and forth between a couple of tasks. And flexible attention is our ability to shift our attention smoothly from one thing to the next. But selective attention is the facet that helps us focus on certain features of our environment and screens the others out. So information comes in through our senses here, sight, oops, made a mess of that. Hearing, touch, taste, smell, all that information that's coming in, most of it, because it's so voluminous, there's so much information that we're exposed to constantly, most of it is simply discarded. We can only take in a small amount of that, and that is, we hold very briefly in a process called sensory memory. Our ability to do this efficiently is really selective attention, to figure out what's important about our environment. Sometimes we think we might be taking in everything, but that's not the case. We have to screen out distractions like this coffee filter keeps unwanted coffee grounds from getting into our cup of coffee. And actually, I want to just mention, when you download these, or if we send them to you later, there's a little video clip that there's a link to at the bottom, which is a really wonderful example of attention and selective attention, and how we orient our children will have a big impact on where they are focusing their attention. Now we're going to take a step up in the pyramid and talk about one executive function called working memory. And here we have a fairly simple model of how information gets into long-term memory. It comes in to our sensory memory. We hold on to that very briefly, and we do some initial processing to get it into working memory. And what happens in working memory is absolutely essential for getting information into long-term memory. It's sort of like a work table where we set out all of the information we need to work on. Some of it may be incoming information. Some of it may be information that we bring back into working memory from long-term memory. And one of the analogies I like to use is it's like making a recipe. So you set out all of your ingredients, some things we just bought at the store, and some we pull out of the storage pantry. That's like long-term memory. So when we're thinking about something, we assemble all this new information and retrieve information from long-term memory to consciously work on it. Working memory is the only conscious processing we have. And so sometimes we have to assemble a lot of information and think about a complex problem and process new information and connect it to what we already know. And the amount of time and effort and connections that we're able to build as we rehearse that information and think about it in working memory will have a big impact on how well and how deeply it's stored in long-term memory. So we're going to do a little example of working memory now, just to give you an opportunity to use your own working memory and as a way to understand the concept a little better. So when I turn to the next slide, you will see some numbers and letters, and you will have a few seconds to memorize them. Ready? Here we go. Okay, so you don't have to type it in chat or anything. Just think to yourself if you're able to recall that. And, oopsie, I didn't mean to do that one. I meant to go backwards and show you. If you remembered 74B85F, if you could recall that, great job. Give yourself a pat on the back. Now we're going to try a little bit harder one. Here we go. Can you remember that sequence? Unless you have a photographic memory, you probably can't, and don't feel bad. Most adults have a working memory capacity that can manage about 7 pieces of information, chunks of information. It could be plus or minus 2. So that sequence that I just showed you had 10 items, and therefore cannot be easily remembered by most of us. And so my purpose there was not to see if you could actually do that, but to give you a little bit of the experience that some of our children have, even when they're looking at a smaller, if children don't have sufficiently enough space in working memory, then everything can look to them like this. And pretty much what you do when you look at something like this, and you know you can't remember it, is it disappears, it's gone. And you may not even try because you know it's very frustrating. So building working memory capacity can let all of us better accommodate and manage the kind of information that we're typically exposed to, which won't be all of that. It'll be something that is 7 or so. But if you only have 3 or 4, a capacity of 3 or 4 or 5, things can get pretty frustrating. I'm going to go beyond that. Okay, so not only is working memory very, very important in encoding information in long-term memory so that we can retain it and retrieve it later, there are a whole bunch of other things that we use working memory for. And, of course, most of these are absolutely essential in an academic environment when our kids get to school. So things like note-taking and test-taking and communication, collaboration, critical thinking, all of these things are really very much dependent on working memory as well as other cognitive skills. So we're going to come back to our pyramid of skills again. We've talked about foundational cognitive skills. We've talked a little bit about those core executive functions. And now we're going to focus a little bit on higher order executive functions and the connections between all of these skills and how most children are measured in school by their reading and their math scores. So this is a way that we can think about how cognitive skills impact reading. And I want to make sure that everybody remembers to type any questions that you have into the chat window. I don't see anything there yet, but hopefully you have found it, and I want to encourage you to type questions there. So most educators, if you ask them what the core or basic processes of reading are, will say something like decoding and fluency and comprehension. And that's great. We have to do all those things to be good readers, but they're also not the most basic. In fact, there is no decoding part of our brain. in order to decode, we actually have to build connections between a couple different parts of our brain that aren't normally connected together. And on top of that, we have to integrate into that our ability to sustain our attention, to visually discriminate very quickly between a B and a P or an M and an N, to keep the letters and the words in the right order as they come into our brain. When it comes to fluency, things like visual span, which is how much information we can take in a glance, or flexible attention and our processing speed are going to help or hinder our ability to read fluently. And then comprehension is, of course, where rubber really meets the road. And here we get into some of those higher order skills, as well as some of the other executive functions. Working memory, planning, visualization are absolutely critical. So we're going to do just a little bit of an example here. This is a clip from the very beginning of one of my favorite childhood books, and every once in a while I pull it back out because I still enjoy Mary Poppins. If you want to find Cherry Tree Lane, all you have to do is ask the policeman at the crossroads. He will push his helmet slightly to one side, scratch his head thoughtfully, and then he will point his huge white gloved finger and say, first to your right, second to your left, sharp right again, and you're there. Good morning. So close your eyes now for a minute. Can you visualize that? Can you remember which way to turn first, which way to turn second, and that third sharp right again will take you to Cherry Tree Lane? So that's an example of where, without having good visualization and working memory skills, it's going to be very challenging. Jenny has asked a question about long-term memory, and I will definitely come back and address that a little bit later. Math, same principles apply. We think about some of the important underlying skills of spatial representations, information manipulation. Having good spatial memory, visualization, directionality, that core understanding of spatial relationships, it turns out is very, very predictive of success in all of math. So we logically think of spatial representations, particularly when we think about geometry or reading charts and graphs, or maybe looking at a map and understanding the route we have to follow. But in fact, these skills are directly connected to, based on a lot of recent research, from everything in math, from counting to algebra to calculus. So having those good spatial skills is going to be important. Information manipulation. You can think here about what I used to call, when I was in grade school, story problems. And today in math, everything is a story problem. It's all about the application and understanding the meaning of these various quantitative relationships. Keeping track of where you are in solving a problem would be part of sequential processing and keeping track of that. And then, of course, math is very logical. So reasoning skills, planning skills, being able to draw inferences is important. And let's just do a quick math example. So we have a little shape here on the left. I'll put a circle. I think I need a lighter color. I'm going to choose a lighter color, get that light yellow. Here we go. All right. And if we are asked to rotate this shape 90 degrees counterclockwise, which of these answers would be right, A, B, or C? So if you said C, oh, I think I changed this from something. 90 degrees counterclockwise. If you said A, you were right, because that's a 90 degree. If you said B, that's a clockwise rotation. And if you said C, that's a 180 degree rotation. So A would be the correct answer here. So being able to visualize that is something that is one of those skills that we know is very foundational and is also developed. So Lainey has asked a question about comprehension, reading and listening, and BrainWare SAFARI will in fact help with those. We see significant gains in reading and comprehension following use because we're developing those underlying cognitive processes like working memory, planning, the ability to manipulate information and to visualize things. And we can I'd be happy to share some research with you where we see actual gains in reading comprehension. So, and I haven't forgotten Jenny's question either, but we're going to do that a little bit later. So BrainWare SAFARI, many of you have maybe already started using it with your children. Just a little bit about it for those of you who may not be familiar with it. It's software that develops 41 cognitive skills. So all of that pyramid of infrastructure, those skills in the foundational cognitive skills, executive functions, and higher order executive functions, that's what BrainWare is all about. And it develops them in a very comprehensive and integrated way. So it comes from clinical therapy, and it's the best practices of different kinds of clinicians, like vision developmental experts, speech and language pathologists, psychologists, other kinds of learning specialists. And a group of these folks work together over 40 years to develop the specific set of exercises that are embodied in BrainWare. It is supported by research, and we have about 30 studies with a variety of different types of populations. But what we've seen, and this goes to address, Lainey, your questions, typically we see something on the range of 2 to 4 years of cognitive growth when you use the program according to our recommendations, which we will address very specifically in just a minute. And then we also see it accompanied by 1 to 2 years of academic growth. And that's because when you develop these underlying cognitive processes that you use in reading and math, as we just saw, then you're able to make gains more quickly in improving reading and math. We've also seen significant remediation of these underlying cognitive skill deficits in students with learning disabilities. So we took all those wonderful therapeutic techniques that clinicians do one-on-one with paper and pencil in their offices, and we married it with video game technology. We recommend the program for anyone age 6 and up. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about implementing BrainWare SAFARI at home. So the generally recommended protocol or regimen or plan, if you will, for using BrainWare is 3 to 5 times a week over about 10 to 14 weeks in 30 to 60-minute sessions. And why is that? And here I'm violating my normal rules of how many words to put on a slide because this is so important. The frequency and intensity of the cognitive training that's built into BrainWare is what will drive the kinds of gains we see in our research. So this kind of usage applies for most individuals. If you are working with a child who is in the very, very low performing, or a child who's in the very top 5% of the population, or individuals recovering from a traumatic brain injury, then you might want to modify that standard protocol. And we would encourage you to give us a call or to email us, and we can help with that. But for the vast majority of children and students, this is really a good place to start. When people ask, well, what if I just do it 1 day a week or 2 days a week? Here's what I tell them. It's like going to the gym. If I go 1 day a week, I might feel a little less guilty, but it's not going to do much for my strength, flexibility, or stamina. And the same is true with cognitive training. So that commitment to those first 12 weeks or so is really, really important. So now let's talk about the 3 Ps for success. Planning, presenting, and purposeful coaching. So planning. These want to ask all the W questions. Who, what, when, where, and how. Who? Your child, of course. What are you going to use to assess progress? And we have some suggestions here and some opportunities that you can consider. When and where will they play? Will they actually engage in working in BrainWare SAFARI? You need a computer, as you all, I think, know. It could be a PC or a Mac with the Mac compatibility pack, but making sure that they have access. It seems like such a simple thing, but it's really helpful to think it through in advance. Planning a schedule of 3 to 5 times a week. Our kids' schedules are so filled these days with sports activities or music lessons and school and drama and all the other things that go on. So planning a schedule, really thinking of how you're going to get those 3 to 5 times a week in for 30 to 45 minutes, 60 if you can, over that 10 to 14 week period. So when it comes to assessing the impact, one option that you have, and this is a free option, is we have a behavioral rating scale. It just asks you to observe pretty readily observable things about your child compared to his or her peers, and is a nice way to, then you would revisit it again after 12 weeks or so if they've been using the program according to the recommended protocol. Remember to do the first assessment prior to them starting BrainWare and the final assessment after the planned 10 to 14 week period. I also want to add in that we have recently developed a relationship with the first really parent-friendly online cognitive assessment. It is not inexpensive, but it is a very, very good cognitive assessment. It's called MindPrint, and we can talk more about that, and if it's something you're interested in, actually just type that you're interested in it in the chat window, and we'll send you some information about that. It takes about an hour to administer. It's online, and it's certainly less expensive than, clinician. It's not a diagnostic necessarily, but gives you a really good idea of your child's learning profile and can be used as a pre and a post assessment for BrainWare. Okay, so we'll get to all of you some more information on that. So that's planning. The next P is presenting BrainWare SAFARI to your child. So it's a little hard to generalize here, and you know your child better than anyone else. So what I'm going to share now is some things that people have found effective, but that doesn't mean it's the same thing for everybody. So nonetheless, here we go. One of the things that we often do is talk to kids about what they're really interested or what they want to do when they grow up. And very often it's they want to be a star athlete. Ooh, I've got a typo in musician there, so I want to be a better speller when I grow up. I want to be a rock star. I want to be famous. I want to be president of the United States, whatever that may be. And think about the list of cognitive skills that we've been talking about: attention skills, visual spatial processing. So, for example, when I know that somebody, if I have a young man who wants to be a basketball star, I ask him why Michael Jordan was one of the best basketball players ever in the world. And often they'll say something like, well, he could score a lot of points, or he was really strong, or whatever. And I say, oh, that's true. But his real gift, which he developed, by the way, this is not, he certainly had some natural talent, but a lot of this was very hard work and practice, was that he could visualize the entire basketball court. He knew where everybody was, where the ball was, where everybody was moving, and therefore he was able to lead his team to make that play. So connecting it to what they would like to do and the activities that they really love and enjoy. Another thing to do is help them learn about their brains. I am a big advocate of that. We use our brains in everything we do, and a lot of people have some misconceptions about their brains. Many people believe that intelligence is fixed. Kids can often get into this rut because they say, I'm just dumb and I'll never get any smarter, or they sort of classify the kids in the room as dumb or smart or whatever. But that's clearly not the case. And here are two awesome books. You might see if they have them at their local library. There are undoubtedly other books as well, but these particularly emphasize the brain's ability to change. It's called Plasticity. It's sort of a play on a fantastic elastic brain, where it talks about how your brain develops in interaction with the environment, and that you have to try things that are harder than you can currently do in order to be able to increase your brain's capabilities. There is also a wonderful YouTube rendition of your fantastic elastic brain. If you just go into YouTube and Google it, you will get a video where, for free, where those you can actually see that book and have it read out loud. Some other videos to consider. These are 3 of my favorites. One is the Karate Kid, and of course most kids are familiar with these. These happen to be, again, YouTube links that you can use. You can obviously go search for your own, but here's a good starting point. The first one is the Karate Kid, which is the scene where Daniel comes to understand that the wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off drill that he has been through. He thought he was just helping Mr. Miyagi clean up those old cars, but it turns out that he was actually drilling the motions of karate and getting them to the level where they become automatic. There are a few salty words at the very beginning of this, so depending on your audience, you might fast forward before running it for your child, but just fair warning there. The second is the scene with Luke Skywalker in the swamp with Yoda during Return of the Jedi, and Luke is unable to levitate the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp with his with the Force, but Yoda proceeds to do it, and Luke says something like, "That's not possible," and Yoda replies, "That is why you fail." So sometimes trying something, really pushing our ability and believing that we can do it is important. This can be a nice movie to go to when your child gets to the point where things are pretty challenging in BrainWare, and everybody will get to that point at some point. And reminding them that if they believe, it's going to carry them a long, long way. The last video is one that I actually have loaded in here, and I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of it because it is, I'm going to get rid of that little thing, and let's see how smoothly we can do this. I'm going to play this. This is about riding a bicycle, which most of us and most of our kids have the experience of doing, and it should be coming up now. No, it disappeared. All right. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come back to my presentation. So you have the link here, and I really encourage you to watch it. It's a lot of fun, and I think your kids will enjoy it too. It's narrated by a man who, like all of us, learned to ride a bike when he was a young kid, and he rides the bike very well. So the sort of thing that we say, okay, we'll never forget how to do that. But his friends, who are mechanics, play a trick on him, and they engineer a bike so that it works the reverse of a normal bicycle. When you turn the handlebars right, the bike turns left. When you turn the handlebars left, it turns right. And it turns out that our responses and the patterning in our brains is so ingrained that it is just about impossible, certainly on the first few tries, and for probably many, many tries, to be able to ride that bike. So when we have skills that are very strongly ingrained, they're very hard to change, but they're also very powerful because we don't forget them. And this is exactly what we're trying to do in BrainWare. We're trying to give our children practice with these skills in a way that lets them repeat them over and over again until they become automatic. And that's why it's not a negative thing if they have to repeat an exercise in BrainWare many, many times, because every time they work on it, they're getting that much closer to really being able to do it and getting it to the level of automaticity. So that brings us to purposeful coaching. Here are some of the keys to discuss or for you to use as you're supporting your child. Having them move around and try all of the exercises. It's a really good idea to maybe have them try all of the exercises before they start to repeat them. They will find out, of course, that some of them they like better than others, some of them are easier than others, and that will vary by individual. We all have cognitive strengths and weaknesses, and so it's going to be a different experience for every student and every child. The next thing is we often encourage people to use what we call the 10-minute rule. Work in one exercise for about 10 minutes. If you pass 2 or 3 levels quickly, move to another exercise before the 10 minutes is up. If it's hard, if you're at that point where you're struggling a bit, when it's really challenging, don't give up. Keep at it for those 10 minutes. And most kids are willing to persist in something for a period of time when they know there's that light at the end of the tunnel. If your child can't tolerate that, move it back to 5 minutes, but trying to work in that exercise, because even if you're not passing a level, your brain is still growing, and that's an important part of it. Trying to keep the number of levels completed more or less even across all of the exercises, and we'll give you a clue as to how you can, both you and your child can go and check on that. And this is important because different exercises develop the skills in different ways and different combinations. So there's not just one attention exercise or one memory exercise in BrainWare. It's all those skills are developed in many different ways throughout the program. And that means that you can move around when you're working on a skill that's particularly challenging and have a variety of different ways to do it in different exercises. So BrainWare was designed the way it was, where the user has a lot of choice about what exercise to work in. It was designed that way for a reason, because everybody's path through the program is going to be different because of where their initial strengths and weaknesses are. Choice is also very motivational, and so enabling some level in choice increases motivation and the intensity with which your child will engage in the program. So the counterbalance is that, most of us, if we're left to our own devices, will tend to choose the things that are easiest first, and the things that are challenging and really drive growth are the areas that we're weakest in. So having a balance is often best. You can try, if you need to, completing level 1 of all the exercises before you go to level 2, or you can establish a principle that you don't get more than 1 or 2 levels ahead in the exercise you've done the most of. There are 5 exercises that tend to be the most challenging for most people. Those are sky scanning, bear shuffle, turtle recall, tree tic-tac-toe, and rhythm ribbit. So you can maybe establish the principle. Many teachers do this in schools. Well, let's say, okay, today we're going to spend the first 10 minutes on rhythm ribbit, and then we're going to move around to 2 different exercises for our 30-minute session. See what your child's favorite is and save those for the end of the session. Then again, it can be very motivating, and remind them that as they're getting ready for it, they're working on those skills and strengthen them. So when they get to the one that they really love, they're going to really be very, very good at it. In terms of tracking progress, this is part of the purposeful coaching, keeping track of how your child is doing. We're going to show you the progress board, and I'm going to do that in the demo in just a minute or two. But we also have a BrainWare progress chart, and again, this is available in the Behind the Handouts tab to the right of your screen, where you can download that. You can just use your own calendar, of course, but this is just a handy way to do it. And then that can be the basis for talking with your child about their experience. You can say things like, wow, that's 3 sessions already this week. You're right on track. Or it looks like you worked really hard today. Talk to them about what are the easiest and the hardest. When they start to get insights into how their own brains work, that can be a very powerful thing. And then later, after several weeks, you might even have a conversation about whether they are observing any changes. There's one of my favorite stories is about a speech pathologist who was working with a young man who was using BrainWare SAFARI. And one day the science teacher came down and said, well, I don't know, this student, he's never gotten anything above a C before, and he got an A on his recent science test, and I want to see what you're doing and, what's causing all this. And so they took the young man and sat him down, and of course they reassured him they were confident that he had not cheated on the test, because they were, and asked him what was different. And the young man said, well, there was nothing really different. He said, although I was able to take notes. And they said, wow, well, taking notes is, a great part of being a good student. And he said, yeah, well, Mr. Smith, I can't remember the name of the science teacher, Mr. Smith started talking slower. And I was able to follow what he was saying and take notes at the same time. Well, I can promise you that Mr. Smith, who had been teaching science for 30 years, didn't slow down. What happened was that this young man's ability to keep up with what was going on, to hold that information in his mind, to divide his attention between the teacher and his note-taking, all of these were stronger, and they supported him in doing that. So when you get to, oops, I'm going to change the slide. When you get to the other aspects of purposeful coaching, the time your child spends is more important than levels completed. So they will often focus on levels because you do that in any video game. But really, them actually working in the program is the most important. Supporting and encouraging when the going gets tough. Typically, one of two things happen. The tough get going. Some kids just really are driven and want to beat the game and will just keep at it. Or you may have a child who wants to give up and might hear something like, the program is boring. Or as Karen, who talks to many parents at this stage whose children have figured out how to change their password and then they conveniently can't remember it. The good news is we can take care of that for you. So those can be clues that things are getting challenging, and that's good. That's so important. Now you're getting to the point where this is really growing your cognitive skills. It's helping your brain get strong in those areas. It's like going to the gym and lifting. You couldn't lift 200 pounds. You still can't lift those 200 pounds, but you're getting closer, and every try gets you closer and closer. Celebrate the victories. You know, at some point you're going to have that breakthrough where they're able to do a task they hadn't been able to before. If all else fails, sometimes parents do resort to external motivators, stickers or things like that, just as reinforcers. But again, that's up to you and your parenting style and your relationship with your child and all those sorts of things. So what I'm going to do now, Jenny, the presentation, we can mail you out the presentation, but you should also be able to download it. If you go to the Handouts tab and click on that, you will see a couple of documents there. One is a copy of the slides. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share my entire screen. And Karen, I'm going to count on you to let me know if we have an issue and if you cannot see my screen. So, okay, great. So this is BrainWare SAFARI, and if you have kids who've already logged in, this will look familiar to you. The first thing they did or will do is choose their Safari friend. I'm going to choose Jackie Jaguar today. And what happens is that Jackie starts off as a baby, or whichever character they choose, and she grows up as they pass levels and hit certain milestones in the program. And they get a big kick out of that when it happens. It's really a very fun part of the game. This is the progress board. We're going to come back and look at this because we haven't done anything yet. But you'll see your child's name every time they log in. It will be throughout the program. So out here in the jungle is where all the exercises are. We call them exercises because we know they're serious clinical therapy, but it's okay if your kid calls them games, and that's not a problem. So I'm going to just show you a few of the games that we let you know were some of the hardest ones. I'm going to start with one called Bear Shuffle. Now, I am going to be able to show you different levels, but your child will always start at level 1 in all of the exercises, and you have to repeat that or do that level until you've passed it before you go on to level 2. So when you enter into any of the exercises, you will see instructions. They can read the instructions. They can also listen to them being read aloud by clicking on this speaker. If you are interested in seeing which skills are developed in each exercise, you can click on this skills button. Typically, children don't do that, but if they're curious and if you want to know, it's there for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this, and I'll explain it. So the computer is going to give us 3 cards and turn them face up and then turn them back over. So there were numbers on them, and our job is to get them in numeric order from smallest to largest. This is the audience participation part, so hopefully you're playing along with me. And so I remember now, even though I can't see them, that it was a 9, a 3, and a 7. So I'm going to pick up that 9. I'm going to move it to the end. Now, one of the things I want to show you is if you pull it way out here, it'll just pop back to the beginning. So if I have them touching, it'll scoot the other cards over, and hopefully they'll be in the right order now. Okay, so we did it. Good job. Now we need to do it 7 out of 10 times, and you can see on the upper right where it says W and L, that's for wins and losses, so you can keep track of how they're doing there. You can see this gold bar means we're at level 1, and that's how we keep track. So if we did it correctly 6 more times, we would be able to go to the next level. This is one of the harder ones because if we go up, and I'm just going to give you a sneak preview of something your child will be doing on the 4th level. This is going to be 4 cards instead of 3, and after the computer turns them back over and we can't see the numbers anymore, it's going to switch 2 cards around and then switch 2 more cards around, and then we still have to get it into numeric order. And you may be thinking to yourself, I don't know if my child is ever going to be able to do that, but I will tell you that your child will surprise you. So here we go, 6, 5, 4, 7. Now this is the computer moving them. 5, 6, 4, 7. 5, 4, 6, 7, I think. So I think all I need to do is to swap those first 2 cards. All right, let's see. Oh, phew, I did it. Okay. Now, if you don't, you just start again, and again, you get to practice it. And that's that practice and repetition that really is going to drive those big cognitive skill gains. I want to mention one other, I'm going to do 2 others quickly. One is Rhythm Ribbit, and Rhythm Ribbit is one that involves a metronome beat. And this is hard even for many musicians, as we've found. And what happens is, you can hopefully hear with me a clicking. If not, I can hear a clicking of a metronome. And hopefully you can see a fly flashing on the screen. And I have to start to click to the beat. 1, 2, 3. So it's telling me I'm on time. I'm doing well. Oh, I was early that time. Okay, so now I'm going to fail because I want to stop that. So if your child is having trouble with that, make sure that they listen to that beat, get it really ingrained in them before they start clicking. They don't have to click on that first beat. You can listen to that click as long as you need to. You can have them tap their finger on the table, tap their foot on the floor, move their body back and forth in the chair, whatever helps them to really start to track that rhythm. So that's a good tip for that one. The other one I want to just show you really quickly is Turtle Recall. And this is a long-term memory exercise. And so, Johnny, we'll come back and we'll talk about long-term memory again. But this is what it's going to look like the first time they come in. All they're going to do is study the shapes. A circle is 1, a square is 2, and a triangle is 3. And then they disappear, and it says wait at least 12 hours. That doesn't mean you have to come back exactly 12 hours later, because that would be pretty crazy. It can be 24 hours later. It can be 2 days later. It just has to be at least 12 hours because long-term memory requires that amount of time to consolidate. We consolidate memory while we're sleeping, as it turns out. And then when they come back, they're going to get a series. Here, I'll do this really quickly. I'm going to go into another exercise and fool my computer into thinking more time has passed. So the second time they come in, they will get to match the shapes with the numbers. Now, they may not remember the numbers the first time, and that's okay. They can just do trial and error. Oh, no, a square isn't a 1. Let's start challenge again. Maybe a square is a 2. Oh, yes, a circle is a 1. A triangle is a 3. So they'll be able to do this and hopefully be successful at it. But if not, they'll get to practice, and they're going to learn this. And then at each level, they're going to learn, add in a new shape. Okay. So now, anytime they want, and anytime you want, you can come in and check on the progress board. You can see now it thinks we've completed 3 levels, and just 7 more levels until your friend goes through its next growth stage. If you click on the progress board, you will see gold bars for the levels that have been passed. So this is a great thing to do when your child first logs in for their session, is to go and see how many levels have been passed and then plan their attack for that day. So we haven't done very much yet, so we've got lots of room. But we wouldn't want to start with Bear Shuffle today because we've done those. So that's a good way to track how your student is doing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this. And we're going to go back to, and I'm going to come back to my file. Oops. No, I'll come back to my file here. Okay, so hopefully we're back and you can see the PowerPoint now. The last thing we have, we did the demonstration, that's great. A few other random tips for you. And I hope, again, you're putting any questions that you may have into the chat window. There are only 2 ways to cheat in BrainWare. One is to have somebody else do it for you. So if you have an older sibling who all of a sudden gets on your child's account, that's not what we want to do. We want them to develop their own skills. And the other way to cheat is to write things down. So get rid of the paper and the pencil, other than if you're using the progress chart. And it defeats the purpose, of course, of trying to develop those memory skills. So that's pretty basic. Also, parents often start to see some changes after about 5, 6, 7 weeks, somewhere in the middle of that 12-week period. And they may be pretty subtle at first. Some have noticed changes sooner than that, but generally I would say pretty frequently that's about the time. And it may be that they simply can copy the whole math problem onto their paper rather than having to do it a number at a time. Just little things like that that often show up. If you go on vacation and need to miss a week or 2, don't stress out. That's not a problem. Just pick up where you left off and keep going. Of course, those 2 weeks don't count as part of your 10 to 14 weeks, but just go ahead, pick up when you get back. All right, here's some contact information. Encourage you to, you should have in your initial email received a link to the BrainWare SAFARI travel guide. It's like the user manual. It has descriptions of every level of the program and a lot of tips besides that. So that's a great resource, and it's online, easily accessible whenever you need it. And here's our contact information. Here's my information as well as Karen's. We've had parents sometimes ask if their child can talk to the BrainWare lady to ask questions. That's Karen, and she is delighted.
I love it. It's always fun.
Anyway, so we're here for you. We're committed to helping you have a great experience with your child, and you know, however we can help. So Lainey has asked, she's planning to purchase the program today. May I download the software on multiple computers? Absolutely. You can install the software on as many computers as you have. If you've got one at, sometimes it's one at mom's house, one at dad's house, or one at grandma's house, or multiple computers in the same home, or one at school, or one at whatever. And that's fine. Each student has a unique username and password, so only they can use that, but they can then log in from any computer that has the software on it. All right, I want to go back and talk a little bit about long-term memory. So your child will do some work on long-term memory in BrainWare SAFARI, as well as building up those other skills. Remember that getting information into long-term memory requires a lot of rehearsal or elaboration or repetition in working memory. So the more different ways you can present information to your child, visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, you know, having them move and act around it, the more you get them to actually apply it, elaborate, do things with it, the better their chances are of being able then to retrieve it from long-term memory. There's also an important principle about how you space practice. So you can't assume that children will learn something just from being exposed to it once. You know, that's the syndrome. Well, we talked about it yesterday. Well, you're going to have to talk about it again today, probably. And you do massed practice, that is frequent practice, early on in the learning process. So it might be that you repeat something every day for a while, and then as it starts to become more routine, you extend the time periods between the practice to further encode that in long-term memory. So there's a lot of approaches, most of which happen to do with giving the child ample ways to retrieve the information by presenting it in different ways, and plenty of rehearsal to get that those memory traces stronger and stronger and stronger. The neuroscientists have a saying that says, neurons that fire together wire together. And when you're learning, what you're doing is training those neurons to fire together, those little cells in your brain that communicate information. And so the more practice they get at firing together, the more liable, the more able they're going to be to be able to, you know, energize, reactivate when it's timing. Okay, Nia is telling us about a child with learning difficulty, ADHD. Confessing they're not doing as frequently. So, and not getting the desired gains. Okay, well, that's a direct connection there, and good for you for realizing that. If you have a child that has done the program before or done some in the program, but you feel like you really need to start over with the right routine, call Karen, and she can probably help you get restarted. If they've not done very much, don't worry about that part of it. Just start them again and see if you can't get into that routine. Andrea asked about repeating the protocol, and good for you for following it last summer. With some children, we do see a benefit for doing it again. If it was, and a lot of that's up to the child. Sometimes if they got pretty far in the program and they feel like they really put effort into it and that they've done it, you know, they've finished it like they would feel about a video game, I probably wouldn't press it. If they didn't get as far, there are 168 total levels in the program, so if they didn't get up above 140 or so, I would say it might very well be worth trying to do it again. And again, I would suggest that you talk to Karen, give her a call or send her an email. And I'm going to do this. It is called Mind Print Learning. And you can go to brainware.com/mindprint. Get information on that. Okay. Okay, I think I talked about that. Oh, thank you, Nia. That's just, we love to hear that. So we are committed to it, and we believe in this so strongly, and we get so excited when your child is able to do things they never could before. And it tends to be a great self-esteem enhancer, a great booster of their belief in themselves and their ability to learn. So anyway, okay, so we are at 11:29. That was really great timing. If you have other questions, please enter them in here. And again, we'd be delighted to talk to you anytime if you have other questions as you move along and start to experience the program. So we very much appreciate your spending some time with us today. We know time is the most valuable thing we have, and we really are very appreciative of your spending some with us. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to hearing about your experience, and we will hope to talk to you very soon. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.